With your photography, I've sort of really thought of you as a portrait photographer.
Yeah.
You're now doing this amazing work out in the desert and sort of it's landscape work. What brought about that change of direction for you?
Well, the truth be known, my landscapes almost preceded my portraits. Back in the late 1960s, when I began photography, I worked in fashion, advertising, theatre, and got to do portraits of actors and singers, performers. But as light relief from that, I used to go out into the streets and do landscapes, and they were probably urban landscapes. And on one occasion I went to a very pristine site south of Sydney, which is Kurnell Sand Dunes, and in the 70s that was in the late 60s it was before sand mining had begun down there, and there was a huge great deposit of sand dunes just south of Sydney. It's still in Sydney, it's a Sydney suburb, and they've since been mined, which is a great shame. There's only about 10% of what they originally were still left. But when I went down there, and they were still beautiful sand dunes, I did some landscapes there. They were exhibited at the Yellow House in 1971. I moved to the bush out west of Sydney in about 1973, 74. Got some land out there, did quite a few landscapes out there that were exhibited where were they exhibited? Some at the Australian Centre for Photography in 1974, and then later at Michael Nagy Gallery in the 90s, Hogarth Gallery in the early 80s, and they were predominantly landscapes, but because I saw landscape as something that would be more appropriate for the gallery world. Portraits, very interesting for publication, but people don't necessarily want a portrait. They're not a great thing for collectors. Well, certain collectors, yes, but they don't have that universal feel. They don't have the universal connection that the landscape does, in my view. That's why these trees that I tie up together, that sort of was a response to the landscape, wanting to just put a little bit of contemporary consciousness onto a very old landscape. And by making a slight change to those old senna trees, which, by the way, they're skeletons, they're dead trees, those senna trees. I don't mess with the living ones, but I mess with the dead ones. It changed their shape and gave them a little bit of an abstract personality.
I thought they gave them a bit of order in all that, what looks like there's no order at all.
That's right. Maybe that's some sort of, European sort of hang-up that we bring to the country. I just wanted to sort of tidy it up a bit. But the more I tidied it up, I found, I'm not saying that for everybody, I found it became more interesting. So I was just responding to that notion that, tied one tree up and it became interesting. Tie another one up, it became twice as interesting. And in one of those landscapes, I've got about 60 or 70 of them tied up. And that took, days and days and days.
So when you finished your installation, because it is really an installation, did you untie the trees and let them go back to what they were?
I didn't untie the trees, no. In fact, I went back to one site that I'd, tied up the trees 5 years later, and they were still there and virtually untouched. The only thing that changed is one or two of them had been blown over. I brought them back here, wrapped them up in plastic and brought them back as a sort of little, memory. But no, I'm surprised that they don't get mistreated by locals or those that see it. If tour buses pull up and they start pointing their cameras at it, so be it. But they're about 100 metres usually off the main road, so not many people notice them. But it's they're there, and I'll go back and visit those sites again. I look forward to it.